Great. Thank you all for joining us today for the Research Development Opportunity Kickoff. For those of you who don't know, this is the DoD CDMRP discussion. We're very lucky to have a bunch of people from Mayo and a bunch of people from ASU joining us today. It's a small enough crowd that if you do have questions at the end, you're certainly welcome to unmute and ask them. Overall, the agenda today is that this is the official welcome, and thank you for clearing your schedules and bringing your whole selves here. I know it's been really a very stressful couple of months, and to have one more Zoom meeting is, thank you for that. I appreciate it, and not being facetious. We're going to talk about working with the DoD, and we're happy to have John Zern from the Mayo Clinic join us today, and he has vast experience. In partnership, ASU and Mayo are happy to bring this webinar annually to our campuses. Then we're going to do a brief program analysis with Keith Aspinall, and then we'll go through some of the application materials, some example PRMP application materials. And with that, I'll just unshare, and John can launch into his.
Okay. Thanks very much, Faye, and I'll just pull up my slides now and the full screen. Good to go? All right, thanks. So I'm John Zern. I'm from the Strategic Funding Office for Research in Mayo Clinic, and we do serve all three of the Mayo sites, and we're very happy to partner with entities like ASU on many of the projects that we've worked on, especially oriented toward the DoD, and we have had some really nice successes with the CDMRP program as well. So I'm just going to give you a high-level overview of the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program, and then I think our other colleagues presenting today will get into some of the details. Joe, just so right from the top, a lot of people talk about DoD, CDMRP, they get used in sort of this one and the same manner. And I just want to make this distinction right at the outset. So CDMRP is called the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program. It's managed by DoD. It is not DoD's money, so to speak. It's really Congress's money. They've taken these dollars and set them aside. So the first thing to know, of course, it's medical research. This started back in the early 90s. It really came about because of advocacy in the breast cancer community, coming to individual congressional representatives who, instead of saying, we're going to take some money and send it over to NIH, decided instead to allocate some dollars towards this particular program. So in this case, it was breast cancer research, and we said, we're going to put aside $15 million. We want high risk, high reward opportunities, not necessarily sort of the standard investigator initiated research that you see at NIH that can go on for years. We want more of an opportunity to help people develop products, develop solutions, develop tech transfer. They were really interested in things that could happen quickly. So they sent it over to DoD and said, you manage this, because DoD is that kind of entity that is kind of known for getting things done. And they have a way of managing that's very different than you probably encounter with a lot of other federal agencies. So that money started getting sent over to DoD. It went to a group called, back then, it was the Army Medical Research and Materiel Command. Now it's known as Army Medical Research Development Command. It's situated in Fort Detrick in Maryland, and they run the CDMRP program. Now, we'll go forward a little bit and say it's still very much a DoD flavored program, but again, this is really oriented toward disease states. And it's very difficult to see this in detail, but what I wanted to show you just in the scope of this is that this money over those course of that time, this is back to 1992, back when we talked about breast cancer research, year after year after year, these advocacy groups, and really it was those entities that were coming to Congress and saying, help us with more research oriented toward this high risk, high reward opportunity about our our particular topic. So starting with breast cancer research, then it went into other cancers and just continued to grow from there. And it really has snowballed since the teens into now, it went from $15 million to $1.4 million in total funding. So, and it's now just, I think the total was 43 different programs are funded under CDMRP. That doesn't include what will be described later under peer-reviewed medical research program or peer-reviewed cancer or peer-reviewed orthopedics. There's even more subtopics under those. So it's very broad spectrum. So if you're a researcher and you're in your field, you should be looking at CDMRP as an opportunity, because there's probably a little some funding dollar there that might appeal to you. One thing to know about CDMRP is it's an annual program and it gets revised annually. So I think when you think about NIH, you can go to NIH with your idea. And yes, the institutes and centers at NIH have strategic plans, but they're quite broad generally. With CDMRP, those strategic plans get reviewed every year. And some of these programs come and some of them go. So you won't necessarily see the same program year to year. You might see the same program, but you see topic areas within that program change dramatically. Sometimes they say we've filled our portfolio in this particular subtopic, so we're going to branch out. They often see themselves as filling gaps that aren't necessarily being addressed at NIH or other medical research agencies. And they look for those opportunities, or these opportunities again come up from the advocacy network to say, this is a new topic we want you to focus on. And that can get into then the strategic plan for that given year. And you may then see that topic flow out into dollars. They do a pretty good job, I think, of reaching out to the scientific community to ask for ideas. There are opportunities to get onto the strategic plan panels, or they put out RFIs, like many other agencies will put out a request for information. And it's your opportunity to put that idea into their perspective so that those ideas then percolate into the strategic planning system. And 1 year or 3 years later, you may see your idea come out in an RFA. And that has certainly happened in our experience at Mayo. We've responded to these RFIs and had those ideas come right back out a couple of years later as funding opportunities. So one word of caution is that what you saw last year may not be what you see again this year. And I just want to make sure everyone understands that there are ways to see what's going on at CDMRP that these are important tools that you should be looking at when you consider. Don't just go to the recent funding announcement and say, oh, here's the program announcement for this particular opportunity. I just want to point out one thing that I think is most important of all. It's going back to that strategic planning topic, that program strategic plan. Every program puts out a strategic plan year after year. That's where you'll find kernels of information that are probably germane to your area of interest. You can pick up, that's the only place sometimes where I see these little bits and pieces of information where they're talking about where they're going to go in the next 3 to 5 years, or what's most important, or what they've already funded and they feel like that portfolio is fairly full at this point, so maybe we're going to take a step back. Same as looking at what's been funded in the last year or the years previously. It's very useful to look at. They have a very good site in their website for looking up previously funded programs and getting a sense of what have they funded, maybe trying to get in touch when it's the off season to talk with the program officers there to see if those programs are coming back again this year. Sometimes, again, I said they fill their portfolio, so you may see the topic, but maybe they've already funded 3 or 4 very similar programs. So you might have to tweak your idea a little bit, or you see in the strategic plan that this is coming up and you don't see any funding for your program. That's not a bad sign either. That may be that, okay, if this is coming out this year as a focus area, that's an opportunity for me to get in there. Within each of these programs, if you look at the program announcement, this is just a caveat in terms of understanding how they put out their ideas. So you'll see this program announcement, and it might be for a clinical trial, and it might be for breast cancer research. That's not just the scope. That might be what you see at NIH. Okay, come and tell me about your great idea for breast cancer research. Within that program are these areas of encouragement. So you will have to look into the program announcement, and again, look at the strategic plan, but now you're looking at that announcement, the RFA itself. And within that program announcement, you have to pick what are these areas where they're focusing this year. Last year, that might have been different, but this year, here's their areas of encouragement. And what they're asking you to do in your application is go to these areas of encouragement, pick the bullet points that you see that are relevant to what you're going to do, and actually just put them right up front in your application. So again, they have areas of interest that they want to focus on. They need you to identify those areas of interest that are relevant to your research and actually tell them, this is what I'm focusing on. So it's the mindset is, I guess I should say, at NIH, you may be, or at other organizations, you may be able to bring your idea. With CDMRP and DoD in general, they have ideas that they want you to go after. So in a DoD perspective, they may say, and there are some of these programs that are DoD oriented specifically, they have an issue, they have a pain point, they have a topic they want you to go after. So that's where those focus areas come in. They have problems they want you to solve. And this is where the high risk, high reward element comes in too, because if you're focused on this particular issue and you have a solution that you can bring to them, that's going to be exciting for them as a funder. What they're really interested in, and I'll take a sort of a high level takeaway for this for everyone, is that when you talk about your science, you should also be talking about your solutions. That's what they want to hear about. So you might investigate something, you might elucidate, you might measure. But one of the important things that they're looking for when they talk about solutions or goals to this program is, how will this translate downstream into either a device or a pharmaceutical or a change in approach to treatment, even if it's a quality improvement type of approach? What's the solution? So try to envision that, even if you're working in sort of a bench-oriented mechanistic space, help them envision where you will take this. And I'll talk about a couple of the other elements that will help drive that forward in your proposals in a second. But what I wanted to show here was this isn't even all of the programs, but you can see this is the variety of different programs available. And some of these are very simply straight up national disease-oriented topics. Some of these are DoD-oriented topics like military burn. So the DoD is actually stepping in as its own advocate into this space as well and putting money into this CDMRP pool. So you're going to see two types of funding opportunities, really more general funding opportunities like kidney cancer, or you're going to see some military-oriented opportunities. And I'll just point a couple of specifics in a second. Within certain programs, you've got the peer-reviewed cancer program. So you saw in this previous slide, there was lung cancer, there were a whole variety of different cancer topics. And then maybe there's a cancer that you're interested in that you didn't see on that broader list. There's this collective funding opportunity. So it's not big enough to be its own program, but look within the peer-reviewed cancer program and you'll see there are 20, this is only a selection, but there are actually 20 different topic areas under peer-reviewed cancer now in 2021. There's also a sort of a catch-all topic called peer-reviewed medical research. And again, this isn't the full list. There are actually 42 topics this year under peer review. Again, a change from last year. I think last year there were 45 topics. So if you didn't see your topic area on the general list, you might see it here under the peer-reviewed research program. Now, of course, that $370 million is a competition for all of these topics. So it's a big body of money, but it's all of these different topics under that one umbrella. Then also, just so you're aware, there is money from DoD for medical research in certain buckets, but there's also under CDMRP, DoD has pushed money into the CDMRP program specific to its own topics as well. So if you are interested in the military medicine field, and that can be quite broad, you have these different topic areas that you see here. And it really follows the trajectory to some degree of the warfighter in their active duty arena. So you have infectious diseases, you have simulation, so training, what kind of maybe training opportunities might there be? Military operational medicine talks a lot about resilience, preparedness, combat readiness. Then you have combat casualty care, which is you can think of as typically you're out in the field and you've got soldiers in the field who need to be treated immediately. Radiation health, that's been something that's come out of the conflicts in the Middle East. And then rehabilitative medicine. So after that soldier is injured, how do we get that person either back into active duty or move them out of active duty appropriately so they can go into the civilian community? So there are very specific topic areas related to military medicine also under the CDMRP roof. That doesn't preclude other, you've got DoD, Army Medical Research and Development Command has its own pot of money, Navy, Air Force, Special Operations, they all have their own opportunities. And you may have seen this in the form of what's called a broad agency announcement. So if you're looking for funding opportunities, there are other DoD-oriented dollars there too. One thing about eligibility, because a lot of people don't realize that you do not necessarily have to be a citizen of the US to be eligible for this kind of funding opportunity. So you'll note, I'm sure many of you know, that in a lot of other programs, you either have to be a citizen or you have to be in that green card space to be eligible. Here you do not. The other element too is that foreign entities are also eligible. So if you have a partner in another country, they can apply for this funding as well. They can, any organization can, if it's in another country, could apply as a lead. That doesn't happen very often. But if you have a partner outside the US, and we've had that experience on our own, is that that's a very viable opportunity for your outside partner. And you'll find that the restrictions on that opportunity aren't quite as limiting as you might find at the NIH and others. There are some caveats at NIH that make it difficult for foreign entities to apply. With CDMRP, it's not quite as restrictive. So that might be a surprise, but it's pretty good. One nice thing about CDMRP also is it's generally a two-stage process. So you don't necessarily have to go in with your full application right at the time of the opportunity opens up, or within weeks of their deadline. You can go in with sort of an abbreviated application. Usually it's a 3 to 4 page research strategy. So it's a very light version of that. You get your bio sketches together of the people that you want to be on your team. You typically don't draw up a budget. So you go in with a very, very minimal effort, I would say, in terms of just getting in the front door. And about 40% of those pre-applications, they're typically called, are then invited forward. So then you do go into the full application process. And once you're invited forward, you probably have about 8 to 12 weeks to submit that full application. And that, of course, can be quite extensive. And there are many, many parts to those. But it's very nice to go in with the pre-application first. It's sort of a way to test the waters. And if you get in, great. And if you don't, well, then maybe, unfortunately, you don't get feedback on the pre-application. So that's just something to know. But you may get a chance after the program closes for the year to talk to a program officer and get some advice as to where you could change your direction. One thing to be aware of, it's down in the lower left there. Some of these programs they call it a two-stage program, but it's really what they call a letter of intent. And then that's not a pre-application with an invitation. That's just send us a notice that you're coming, and 3 weeks later it's due. So when you look at the program announcement, and every one of these program announcements has its own little oddities, watch out for that LOI. Be careful of that, because oftentimes people think they have this two-stage opportunity. That's really typically the way it's done, but you might run into this LOI situation. And so just be careful of that. You don't want to get taken by surprise. I alluded to this earlier. It's just something important to know about CDMRP is that it's really oriented toward solutions. So oftentimes those focus areas, those areas of encouragement that I mentioned earlier, are really, that's the thing that they want you to go after. And they also want you to come with a solution. So not just are you going to investigate it, but are you going to address the problem that they want, which is, you have to be careful because you have a great idea and it doesn't necessarily match up with their focus program. Well, that's a great way not to get funded. So you may have to look at that and say, how can I tell my story that matches up with what they want to hear about? Or is my research really meeting their needs? Because that's the first thing they're going to ask is are you really approaching what we want done? And then, are you giving us an idea that can actually get carried forward, even if it's years down the line? Is there a way to see the future of your research as a solution? Are you going to come up with something that can actually be put on a shelf somewhere and purchased? And that goes also to the military relevance question. About half of these programs ask, what's the military relevance to us? This is DoD sort of asserting its own authority into this program. That's a usually a one-page section of the grant. A lot of people get hung up on it. I think Faye and the other colleagues here are going to talk about that a little bit more, so I won't go into that. But and here at the bottom, what's that outcome? What's that product? Even to the point of, they'll ask this question, what's your tech transfer plan? So are you going to take your research and walk it over to your tech transfer office, and are they going to help you move this into a marketplace? What's the market feasibility? They don't want to support science that actually won't turn into something. So if you can tell them, I can put this on a helicopter, I can put this in a medic's backpack, or I can put this in a operating room or in an ambulance, that's what they want to hear downstream. So again, about these different aspects is not just, so here's number 2, is it good science? But also, is it actually addressing what they're asking you to talk about? Is it meeting sort of the vision of what CDMRP is going after, that particular program is going after? And then lastly, there's some aspects of who are you speaking to in this grant application, because it's not just a science review panel. There's more to it than that. There's actually 2, I'm going to skip over military. We're going to talk about military relevance later. Is that correct, Nick? Okay.
Only slightly. I wouldn't, if you have some time, I think I would appreciate you touching base on it, because historically, for the academics on the line, I'm not sure about Mayo, this is the hardest part of the proposal for many people, because we don't have direct lines with military, right? So if you have a moment, I would appreciate it.
So you'll see in the application a lot of encouragement toward working with military partners. That's very valuable. I know there are VAs and centers of excellence in your region that are great opportunities to partner up. It isn't absolutely necessary, but it's great to get access to a military population if you can, through the VA or through maybe hospitals that you work with in the community that have veteran populations and veterans clinics. But the more important aspect is they're going to, as I said, about half of these are going to ask this question, what's the military relevance? Don't be too intimidated by that up front, because that military relevance can actually be a bit broad scope. It isn't just about an active duty soldier who's somewhere between 18 and 24 years old and is predominantly male. It can be members of the service who are in the service who are moving on. They may have acquired an injury when they were younger, but now they're moving, they're in their later years. You can retire from the military when you're 40. That's a veteran population, or it's a veteran who's 65 years old, or it's even the beneficiaries of that veteran or that service member. So it could be the spouse, it could be the children. So that scope is actually under the Defense Health Agency perspective, which is sort of this overseeing body of everyone associated under the military umbrella who's a part of the military, not the VA, but part of the military. They've got 12 million people that they cover through TRICARE. So all those people are the full spectrum of what military relevance actually means. Now, of course, if somebody's asking you about military burn, they're probably going to be asking you about active duty soldiers. So just to understand the perspective that some of these programs are really truly focused on people who are in active military. Others are more broad scoped. So breast cancer research may ask you a military relevance question that may be a wider net that you can cast. And it can mean not only the health, but as I point out here in these red highlights, it can also be about readiness or recovery. One thing to focus on too is that while you may be talking about military relevance, they also, of course, want to hear what's the importance in the civilian population, because they see a military need, or they want you to talk about a military need, but they also want to hear about what's the civilian broad scope need as well. So don't get too down in the weeds on military relevance. It's usually a page. It's also very important to talk about how you can bring your idea to the civilian population. So if you're coming at this from a military angle and you're saying, this is great, this is going to be something really awesome for Army, they may not fund you because they also are concerned about commercial public liability. And they know that they cannot be the sole purchaser of your idea. So it's important too to look the other direction and say, what I'm making can be sold at a CVS or can find its way into an ambulance that's run by Mayo Clinic Hospital Service. So, but just keep in mind, military relevance can actually be quite broad scoped. And I think it's worth talking to people. There are people on your campus who've had this experience. Talk to them about how they've navigated that particular question. So just a quick word about proposal components that some of you may not have seen before. Military relevance, we just talked about. Impact statement, you usually get a page for that. If you're talking about an NIH proposal, somebody will ask you, what's your significance? Impact statement, and a lot of people sort of breeze over the idea of significance. It might be important to the science community. Impact statement in this case, again, is what are your outcomes? So keep thinking about where this is going to lead and what you're going to make. What are you going to deliver? Talk about it in terms of deliverables at the end of the spectrum. Even if you're not going to get there after your 3-year research project is completed, when will you, how soon down the road could this become a product? And again, I mentioned tech transfer plan. Sometimes they ask about what's your FDA navigation process. So who are you working with, whether it's your tech transfer office or ideally even maybe it's somebody in industry. Maybe there's a company that you're working with. They love to see that you have a company collaboration out there somewhere because they see you as the researcher taking that idea and turning that into a validation, but they also see then that company taking that TRL level that's up in the 7s and 8s and turning that into a product. And so they really want to see, where's the product in this? Statement of work is something you don't often see in federal programs. You see them often if you've ever gone for EU funding, you'll see that statements of work are very important. Essentially, this is a outline of the tasks the steps that you're going to take to complete the test to do your research. And actually, it's a really great document to go from your objectives or your specific aims and go right into the statement of work and plot out almost like it's a project to say, I'm going to do this, then this, then this, then this. And that's really important because the program officers look at that and you have to be pretty clear that what you're going to do actually looks to them like a viable project. So they scrutinize this notion of how are you going to do what you say you're going to do in the time that you're allotted with the budget that you claim. So science is important, but also can you convince people that you're actually capable of doing the work? That's important. Real quickly, it's a once-a-year program. Often you get these announcements coming out January, February. We're already we've got about 7 programs that are open right now. There's several more coming out over the next several months. Peer-reviewed medical research program just opened a couple of weeks ago. I can't tell you off the top of my head what the closing date is for the pre-applications, but they're sometime, I think, early April. So you would hear back once you send in that pre-application. About 4 weeks later, you'd hear back with an invitation. 8 to 12 weeks later, the full application is due. So if you're saying, I've got an application due sometime in April, you can expect that your full application is probably going to due August and September. And and there's a sign up for CDMRP notices. So if you're interested, you should sign up for that. Lastly, I just want to say there's this two-tiered process of review. One is that it's scientific review. Is it good science? You're going to have clinicians and scientists in the room who are going to be looking at this, and we'll talk in a few minutes to some who have done this kind of work. And then there's also the programmatic review. And the programmatic review includes a couple of different people. One is the program officer or that staffer at CDMRP who, again, I said, is looking at your budget, looking at your statement of work, trying to make sure that what you're doing is, or what you're suggesting you can do, is actually something that you can do. So it's very important. They scrutinize that very carefully. And the other piece then is this, there's usually this consumer reviewer, which is either a patient or someone from the community in the advocacy world who is looking at this from that standpoint. How is this going to impact patients? Will the patients actually do the treatment or the test or the clinical trial that you're proposing? Is this going to make a difference in the lives of patients? So when you talk about impact and you talk about what you're going to make, it's very, very valuable to include, especially in the technical plan, which is what the consumer tends to read first and foremost, is that you're coming up with end solutions that are going to not only improve their treatment, so obviously their health is going to get better. Is it going to improve the quality of life? Is it going to make for easier treatment? Is it going to reduce the cost of treatment? Is it going to have an impact on my insurance? So thinking about all of those aspects that are actually going to change the way the patient is either treated or improves their quality of life, those are things well worth talking about and should be addressed throughout your application. But especially note that is going to be, and it's going to be addressed in the review. And I have been told many times now that if the consumer reviewer doesn't like what they see, it doesn't matter if the science is great and you score highly on the science. If they don't see viability, it may not go forward. So you really are appealing to two different groups. And I think are we going to just take on questions as we go?
We're gonna, if we'll pause, I think we'll just transition back to my screen real quick.
Yep.
And then if you do have questions, put them in the chat. LJ is monitoring that as well. And we'll go kind of relatively quickly to give us time to kind of have that discussion, but Keith is next and he's going to tell me when to advance.
Okay, yeah, I'm Keith Aspinall. I'm a competitive intelligence analyst in research development. I looked at some broad trends in funding over the last couple of years. This is very high level and it's trends. So this is a full slide because phase driving, I didn't use animations. So over the last 3 years, there's a little bit of 2020 in there, but this is primarily 2017 to 2019. There was nearly 3,000 awards made through CDMRP. Of that, 152 went to universities without a medical school. So ASU obviously does not have a medical school. So this provides some context in terms of like the preparation you need to be competitive. That 152 awards to non-medical school universities, 5.3% of all awards. That's not a win rate, that's the percentage of all awards that went to universities similar to ASU. That said, those non-medical school universities were more successful in the medical programs that weren't cancer focused. So 6.4% of awards versus 3.8. This all helps kind of orient you to what is practical and the kind of preparation, again, that John mentioned, to be competitive. Is not something to kind of go into, oh, that looks interesting, that you need to be prepared and responsive to what DoD wants. And then in looking at what the mechanisms are, the two most common, and these are bigger award mechanisms, so that would be one of the reasons why there's more awards, are the Investigator Initiated Research Award and the Discovery Awards. Those both have over 20 awards to non-medical school universities over the last 3 years. So just reiterating John's point, it's like understand what the program requirements are before beginning so that you can respond to them directly. and that will put you in a position to be successful, or to know that you're not quite ready because your time is valuable, and not chasing something that is has a low chance for success. The next two slides just provide some of that data backup on that. This is the count of awards where there's a subtotal for medical and cancer, and you can kind of see those win rates again higher with the medical. Not win rate in terms of chance of success, but again, the number of awards that went to universities similar to ASU that do not have a medical school. And it broken down by those three types. And the last one is the award mechanisms. Again, these are the bigger award mechanisms. So the 6 that I showed there on the left, those are all the ones that basically average 2 awards or more per year to non-medical universities. So a lot of that is because some of the programs are very big. It's John had showed some data on how much was allocated to each program, and that it is a little top heavy, but you can kind of see the award size there, where universities similar to ASU are more likely to get an award, and again, that's tied to how many awards are available, and that just kind of again provides context to get you as a researcher thinking about, is this worth my time? Do I have an answer? Do I have a solution? To give yourself a go, no-go decision on whether to apply, and the work that needs to go, the prep work before you get into the formal application process.
And with that, thank you, Keith.
Yep.
I didn't introduce myself. I'm representing a proposal management perspective for this presentation. You're hearing a lot from Mayo and from ASU. So this presentation is kind of geared to the ASU folks to let them know that this is something that you can pursue, that we have some past performance in. It's just very small. And for the Mayo folks who are on the line, we will send you the recording as well. And we encourage the cross collaboration between ASU and Mayo in pursuit of these, perhaps not this year if you're just meeting the people, but for subsequent years, that might be something of interest. And we can certainly create the networks and the for that. If you're on the line from Mayo and you haven't used your email to log in, feel free to private chat that over to LJ, and maybe she can capture that. Otherwise, we'll track you down. So CDMRP, I personally find it very confusing. There are a lot of programs out there, just as John articulated. So that's why we have John speak, because it's kind of his bread and butter and not ours. So I'm going to go quickly over the PRMRP, only because those are the top 2 that we see a trend for universities without medical schools to be winning in. And that's just a way to, it's just an exercise, right? So in the PMRP, there's these, you see the clinical trial, the discovery focused and investigator initiated. Those are the top 3 in the middle that we have the most success with. I'm going to focus on those 2. I'm going to go pretty quick so we can get to question and answers and some discussion at the end. But Discovery Award doesn't require a lot, doesn't require a pre-proposal or that pre-application that was referenced before. So I'm just going to give you a minute to read this, and I'll stop talking. Okay, the take-home message from John's is that they are pretty quick, right? There's a 5-page project narrative, then you have multiple attachments, and they're usually one page here, 1 page there. They have to be very concise and very relevant, right? So if you're not hitting a mark with an audience, a receptive audience member, or socializing your idea with them, you're going to be out of the pool. So it does make that bar very high, but that makes it that much more important when you win, right? So something to think about. The other attachments here include a 1-page technical abstract, a 1-page lay abstract, a statement of work similar to the process that John reviewed. Again, I would completely reiterate is that your statement of outcome flow right through your statement of work. That's a very logical thing, and it will allow you to really articulate what you want to get done in this proposal. One thing to note is that the Discovery Award is a blind review out of all of the ones that we kind of focus on. And that's really exciting because then they look just at the concept. It's also frightening because they look just at the concept. Investigator initiated, again, just kind of a brief review of this. I will send out the solicitations with I will ask LJ to send out the solicitations along with the recording of this event. And always want to look at the topic areas. This one is, I put pre-proposal because it fit, but pre-application is what's required here. And then the pre-proposal is again, a 4-page quick turnaround. You hit all of the high points really quickly: military relevance, the research strategy, the impact, the research idea, and you clearly articulate the topic area. Those pre-applications and pre-proposals, depending on your word, are then screened, and it's similar to what John was saying, is that they are screened for their research idea, their strategy, and their impact. But also of note is program relevance. Always want to say the military wants this, I will do this. And it doesn't have to be, you're not going to solve everything. You might not be able to put your technology or idea into the Mayo ambulance fleet next year. But if you can point to it and the line is very clear, that's really what the take-home message on that is. Focus program, again, it requires pre-proposal, but I'll give you a minute. And then the next slide has the maximum funding and the duration. So again, for focused, you have a pre-proposal. It's a slightly larger draft, but you're at 6 pages. But again, hitting all of the high points: impact, strategy, the challenge, the topic area. In this case, you'll want to focus on the team. And again, the review criteria are pretty much the same. So we talked a little bit about the timeline for these 3. Again, there's so much more out there for CDMRP. These are the 3 I just wanted to give you the illustration for. They have been released as of this week, and so we quickly scan them and put their dates in here. So the turnaround for the pre-application for the discovery in the IIA are late April. Focus awards May 13th. So that's something to think about. Again, just reiterating that there is scientific and then there's programmatic, and you can be challenged either way. So on the one hand, again, reiterate, your audience is very specific, and yet it's very segmented. So you want to hit that along the way. For those of you who are at ASU, we do offer subsidized trips to DC when you can travel. I just wanted to point that out. And the rules are here, but we can't travel yet. Just know that you can. And finally, I'm going to put a pin in this one. MHSRS is a way to understand military health as defined by DoD and researchers in the field. We post, and I usually send out to people who are interested in this mechanism when those abstracts open. It's a great opportunity to present your research, and I obviously didn't update it for this year because the abstracts are open. Present your research, get in the mix. I don't know if I can't remember if it's in person or virtual this year, but we've had a few people present with success, and it's just a really great way to learn the language. And now I'll go to faculty experience. Dr. Blaine Christian is on the line and has been asked to share her thoughts.
Sure. So I think John did a phenomenal job of explaining the program broadly. And I would probably just reiterate a lot of his points in that there's a high importance placed on the translation. So you really have to understand how whatever it is that you're working on would be used in the future, and have a really knowledgeable plan on that. In addition to having an award, I've sat on panels, and I would say one of the big differences in those panels, and I think this does get back to things that were mentioned before, is that the panels are full of experts and not just academic experts. So those panels tended to review a very small number of proposals, and they brought in experts to review those, not just from academic, but also from the IP and commercialization side. The panel I sat on that was specific for medical devices within a combat environment had a combat medic on the panel, and he was sharing his experience with, what do I have with me when I'm in the field? This is what I already have in my bag. Why would I need that? And so all of those panels really bring in very specifically to small panels with focused kind of technologies, the experts that have the relevant knowledge for both the use cases, the research, commercialization, IP, all of those things are really covered. And I've seen proposals that I think would have been phenomenal at NIH or NSF get shot down because they didn't understand the translation pathway. There wasn't knowledge of really what does it take to get FDA clearance on a device. People who didn't understand what it really takes to go from something in the laboratory to something that sits on a shelf at CVS. And so all of those things have to be included if you are working on medical technology that is in the field medical. I think you would really struggle if you haven't spoken to somebody who has been in that environment, who has worked in that environment. You may not have to have them on your team, but you really have to understand what the framework is for how they work on a, in that environment. So somebody who has been deployed to Afghanistan, someone who has been there, seen what it takes, and knows what is needed. A lot of the proposals were shot down as, we really don't need this. This academic person thought this was a great idea. And I think several of them were really interesting scientifically and had, those NSF kind of basic science advances, but they weren't things that a field medic thought would be useful. So I would really ensure that you're talking to people who would be the physician or the person who would be using the devices or the technology or whatever it is you're working on, and ensure that that really is something that's needed. And also think about your commercialization pathway. If you're at ASU, SkySong has a lot of resources. It does take time to invest in understanding that framework, but understand what it takes to go from your bench to commercialization, so that when you're responding, even though it is a very short paragraph or a couple paragraphs in the application, if they don't make sense to someone who is an expert in IP, in commercialization, it's not going to fly. There's a lot of knowledge on those panels, very specific to the technology. I think I sat on a panel that had only at most 8. I've sat on panels that there was just a group reviewing 2, 8. It's a really small number, very, very focused on a particular type of answer to the call. And they really bring in, those very specific expertise to sit in and combine their knowledge on that panel to ensure that you're really hitting the mark on, everything from A to Z. And again, as John mentioned, that does include significant commercialization. And what I see a lot of times is that the academics are not as familiar with that commercialization part. I've also seen a couple company proposals where they didn't hit the mark on the research. You really have to go A to Z and have a strong proposal across the board. I guess the last thing I would say is, within that proposal, I have seen there are a number of challenges in terms of the paperwork. Once you've been awarded, it is significantly different than the requirements for NIH and NSF. Just be aware that all of their paperwork does differ from what you may be used to. I only have 1 award, so I'm more familiar with NSF, NIH kind of paperwork. There are differences there, and that's been something to work through and understand. And happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. Okay, attendees, now is your chance. You have 8 minutes. You can chat the question or you can unmute. What didn't we answer? I will say that Rachel Levinson's on the line. She's our DC office representative, and she said that the MHSRS call for abstracts came out on Friday. So I will send that along with this email, or LJ will, actually.
and just a comment about MHSRS. I read that the plan is to be live this year.
I feel like I saw that. I
It's not on their
what is
site,
time?
but I saw it.
I feel
elsewhere.
like it's, oh, okay. Or maybe I'm just psychic.
It's
Okay.
usually August, mid-August, late August.
And it's, well, and do you know the location? Usually they pick the location.
The last several years it's been Orlando.
Okay.
So
Something to
Orlando
consider.
in August.
Yeah, it's not an attractive thing, but it's worthwhile. Okay. Okay. Well, I don't know. Oh, yeah. iPhone has a question.
Hi, this is Julianne Holloway. Sorry, I'm on my phone, not my computer. But so I applied a couple years ago, and we got I applied to 2 discovery awards for the CDMRP. And the one project, it was a tissue engineering project that was for a tissue engineering topic area. And we got dinged by the consumer reviewer because it would have to go through clinical trials. And I guess I was confused by that comment, or how maybe we would address something like that, because in that topic area, literally every project would have to go through clinical trials. So maybe we should have probably provided more context in terms of what that would look like. But I think at the end of the day, for a discovery award in tissue engineering, I don't know how to address the comment like that. It will take years for this to get to the market. Like, you can't get around that.
John, do you have a suggestion?
Well, I would say that, because a lot of these awards sort of don't allow for a clinical trial, it's important to depict how that clinical trial might go forward. So if you say, oh, next step is large animal models, and then it's into this, and then we're at the threshold of a clinical trial. If you could just describe what that trajectory might look like without getting there, that would give them at least a sense. They have to sort of be able to see how this would roll forward.
Yeah, I think we did mention that this data would help us. I think it was in our impact that it would help us be able to go into large animal models. But yeah, perhaps we could have been clearer. I guess I was just, after this, they didn't award anything in that topic area. And then they removed the topic area from the call for, it's still not on there. So I guess I worried that maybe they weren't looking for these types of projects that are more in this tissue engineering space. And so it has me concerned about applying again.
The only thing I can say again about that particular topic is that I know that there's a lot of activity within the DoD about tissue engineering. So they may be stepping back and just seeing how their current work unfolds before they go back into the more public opportunity for institutions like ours.
Okay, that helps. Thank you.
Okay, well, I don't have to keep everybody here for the 4 minutes we have left. I do want to mention that the last time we held this call was the last kickoff we had in person at ASU. And at that kickoff, it was a really great discussion. But I wanted to mention that Dr. Jensuk Che was murdered at the end of that year. And so at the end of that month. And so I just want to acknowledge the fact that this is the annual, this is a year past that event, and I think we're still mourning the loss. And so I just wanted to make sure that I got to acknowledge that. In addition to all of the faculty at ASU who attended today and the Mayo folks who joined us, thank you very much for your time. LJ for setting up the meeting, Keith for presenting on the statistics, and gracious time of Dr. Blaine Christian, and finally John Zern, who really I couldn't do this event without. So I appreciate your time today as well. So thank you all. Have a great and wonderful Wednesday, and go do good things and be safe out there.